Hi, everyone, and welcome to our online presentation for Chapter 18, Counseling Multiracial Populations. I am Devan Davis.
I am Micaela Caudillo.
And we thank you for your patience and understanding during this trying time.
Yes, welcome to the future.
So first off, multiculturalism in the U.S., just kind of a broad category. Interracial marriage rates in the U.S., the most common interracial marriages as of 2013 were Latinx white, Asian white, multiracial white, Black and white, and Native American white. Until relatively recently, there were anti-miscegenation laws in the U.S. which prevented the marriage of interracial people and between white people and any person of color. This was repealed in 1976 or 1967 from the case Loving versus West Virginia. Approximately in the U.S., 2.7% of the population is two or more races.
Multiculturalism. So the one-drop rule was a rule created back in
The 17th century?
Yeah, like 17th century.
Yeah, long time ago.
So essentially it said that a person, anyone who has even like a minuscule drop of like Black racial blood.
Yeah, one drop of blood that isn't white means that you are not
considered white. And this was mainly to like benefit the white like elites in the country. So, and also help them to outlaw interracial marriages. So essentially it would help them financially. So say for example, if you did have a person that was barely 1/8 Black and then 7/8 white, they could still consider them Black, so they could be considered basically property, and it helped them financially, as well as it also kind of excused their reason, like their ways about sexually assaulting Black women.
During slave times.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's pretty bad. So this was bad. Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, it kind of set the precedent for how we see race now. Like you can, like for the most part, it's kind of difficult for people to understand people who identify as more than one race. So it kind of set the tone for mandated monoracial identification that we still see often today. So determining one's own identity is very complicated. This can be due to a host of factors. Such as negotiations between the identity of the person chooses and the one that is ascribed to them by society, such as this can be due to phenotype, the community, and the family that you're born into. So a person who is phenotypically Black but was raised in a Black Latinx household and may identify more as Latinx may have a hard time, following through with that identity in the community and in society because they are phenotypically Black and that's how people see them. And so it's kind of pushed on them against their will. This can be altered and changed due to education level, income, geographic location, and residence as influences of how they choose their identity. For instance, Black and white biracial people that have a college degree are more likely to not identify with either of their racial. They're more likely to identify as mixed race versus Black or white, which is one of the options that they have for determining their identity. Some others are, you can just accept the identity that is assigned to them by society. In the previous example, the one who is Black and Latinx may just choose to identify as Black because it's easier for them. Choose to identify with all their racial groups. They identify as Black and Latinx across a variety of circumstances. And you can do this by actively choosing one racial identity in whatever instance you are. And they can choose, for instance, that guy who is Black and Latinx just chooses to be Latinx because it's easier to choose yourself and they like to choose themselves versus having society choose for them. And the chosen identity will be less likely to change across contexts. Like I'm going to be Latinx here and here and here and with these people and those people. And it's more resilient. Or you could choose to identify as mixed race. As we said, Black, white, biracials who have a college degree are more likely to do.
So what are you? That is a very common question that people of mixed race often get. It can be very harmful to them because it's essentially telling them to validate their existence among everyone. And usually the answer is expected to be monoracial. Or if they do identify themselves as multiracial, it's rarely enough for the person, really enough information for the person asking. They'll pry further, which could also, leads them to feel like they're being judged based on their physical appearances. It kind of just sets the tone in terms of society, really just bases off, people's interactions and their judgments on people's physical attributes. And also kind of implies like there's this influences just how they feel about you, and something that's important to know. That's something that's actually I've encountered a lot in my life, and especially at work, especially because the population I tend to work with has very little filter. So often I'll find my answers will be either what I think they'll just kind of take and be like okay with, or I'll just give them a very vague answer, kind of implying that it's not really important to either of us and we can just move on because this isn't really appropriate anyway. But yeah, that's a common issue that it's, don't ask that. Don't ask that.
But there are some definite strengths of being mixed race. According to the textbook, mixed race persons often have a more natural ability to obtain cultural competence. And so they're easily able to relate to and be competent and humble, so humility, cultural competence and cultural humility with people of different races and across a variety of settings. They tend to be more open and accepting of these cultures and less prone to the prejudices that some of us are prone to. They can often feel supported by and have access to multiple communities. But as we'll discuss in a second, that is not always the case. They have the ability to understand issues from multiple perspectives. And so they can see things from the perspective of someone who has grown up in a white house versus someone who looks black. If this person is black, white, biracial, they have that ability to see perspectives see things from a variety of perspectives. They can have lower feelings of alienation because they fit into more groups. Again, as we'll discuss in a second, that is not always the case. And they have a pronounced ability to identify in identity fluidity. So someone like me who is 100% white, I am 100% white 100% of the time, across all situations and time and space. But someone who is ethnically ambiguous and maybe mixed race, they have the ability to identify as a variety of things if they so choose, depending on their racial makeup. And they also have greater opportunity for international travel, according to adolescents in a study described in the Sue textbook. They believe that that's one of the greatest strengths of being mixed race is that they have a greater opportunity to travel around the world unhindered, which I do not know if is as accurate, but that's what the textbook says.
Kind of lost that opportunity now.
Yeah, that opportunity does not exist anymore.
Not really.
Yeah.
Okay. So common issues of being mixed race, as Devan mentioned earlier, even though they can feel more accepted by multiple communities, it could also be the opposite in terms of since their communities, their different groups might not see them as entirely like a part of that group, they might alienate them, so they could feel alienated. Another issue actually is that when often nowadays, it'll change as time progresses, but nowadays a lot of the multiracial children have monoracial parents, and the problem with that is a lot of times the monoracial parents can't really empathize with the issues that multiracial children encounter. So that will definitely be likely be an issue that will come up in therapy in the future. They definitely also can experience similar discrimination that monoracial minorities encounter, especially among different groups. They also have that just societal pressure to appear or identify as monoracial. And often their identity is determined by other people. So they might say they're one thing, but everyone could be like, okay, but in their mind, they're like, no, but really you're just actually Black. They're essentially being constantly reminded that others place the emphasis on the importance of their appearance, and they also have to deal with receiving the reactions and opinions of peers in society under the with the knowledge that they're mixed race.
Yeah, with the what are you question that people get a lot, it's like if you answer like, oh, I'm multiracial, it's like, no, but what are you? You know, and then they'll have to like boil that down completely, you know, disregard their chosen identity. And as you can see from the strengths and the issues, they're kind of one and the same. So like a strength was there are less feelings of alienation, and a common issue is that they feel alienated a lot. So like
there's no like consistency.
There's no consistency, and it's probably due to the fact that this this group, multiracial people, is one of the least studied groups of people in all racial categories. They like to choose. Usually, researchers will choose a very cut and dry group of like people who are Asian or Black or white or Mexican or Latin American or whatever. They'll choose the one specific group to study, or a cluster of group, but they wouldn't study multiracial people as a unit or as like a group of identities. Yeah. It's less common. Oh yeah. So implications for clinicians. First thing we have to know, this is on the guidelines for clinicians described in the Sue and Sue book. The first thing we need to do is resist the urge to learn how the client identifies, but rather what their identification means to them and their life story. So I'm sorry, I got tripped up on the words there. So what this essentially means is that you don't want to learn how they identify just to get their identity and move out of the way, but you want to know what this identity means to them, because identity is a very important thing. It's something you carry with you every day. And for multiracial people, their identity probably means more to them than to most, because it's so it's such a big part of their life, and it's so ambiguous, and they get so many questions about it all the time. Yeah. So that could be certainly a very important part of why they presented to therapy, so you need to remember that. Also consider that the presenting issue is not an identity issue. As I just said, it could be an issue of why they did, but it is probably, or it could be completely unrelated. They could have come to their own conclusions about it. But you have to acknowledge the hurt and isolation that one encounters on a daily basis when they experience the invalidating questions like, what are you? Become aware of your own biases, stereotypes, and preconceptions about mixed race persons, as you would with a person of any race when performing therapy. Do not assume the racial background of clients. Allow them to self-define. Feel like that's kind of self-explanatory. And then strong feelings of loneliness, isolation, anger, guilt, and shame can be a product of trying to cope with the external factors of prejudice of being mixed race or multiracial, rather than being a distinct symptom or aspect of a mental health disorder. So the being depressed and being a shut-in may not be a aspect of their depression. It could just be an aspect of hating going outside and being treated by racists in whatever community they're in.
Yes. All right, and lastly, identifying strengths and resources available to someone with a multicultural identity instead of focusing only on the challenges is really important. Emphasizing the freedom to choose one's own identity. It is important to note that identity can be fluid and often changing. So don't always assume that someone is like, even if they do present with one identity and they obviously have more than one, allow them to identify themselves however they may choose. Be open to exploring sources of racism and the client's experiences as a mixed race person. Recognize the value of family counseling, especially for children. Possess knowledge of the history and issues of hypodescent ambiguity and marginality, and become cognizant that for many multicultural people, their identity is not a part of the presenting issue.
Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. It's been kind of a little bit of a roller coaster getting this all put together. We hope you like it. We hope you learned something. And we look forward to engaging with you in discussion questions on the discussion forums on Titanium.
Indeed. Good day.